Hello, 5D is back for another episode of the Deep Feed podcast, episode 14, Step to the Tech. This one's called that because TECHSTEP, which in case you don't know what it is I'm a massive fan of drum and bass. If you didn't know that already, you've been living, and you listen to this podcast, you've been living under some sort of rock, listening to this podcast. But yeah, I'm a massive fan of drum and bass, in all its forms. And I was first sort of introduced to it pretty much around the turn of the millennium, both actually, with like underground sort of TECHSTEP at the time, the more sort of sci-fi laden, bit more grittier, sort of a different sound to like, you know, jump up and other sort of forms of drum and bass and jungle at the time. Yeah, brilliant though. It's my favourite pretty much, and I'm gonna like lead you through some of the tracks over the next hour-ish. This is one of the most classic tunes of all time. Conflict, Messiah, original mix, epic stuff. I'm not going to try and explain it. I'm going to let it drop any second now. Just seminal shit. Here we go. Oh, it's on Renegade Hardware, yeah. Great label. Here we go. Yes, what a tune. I love that. You gotta love that. If you're into this sort of music, that is just one of the best. Yeah, I was up to make a cup of tea, and it had me, vibesing around the room. Obviously, a lot of tracks do that, but this one especially, and really, it just reminded me how much I love it. Definitive beat, naughty fucking synth. Anyway, moving onwards and upwards, we have Nasty Habits with a track called Shadowboxing coming in next. I believe Nasty Habits was Doc Scott on production. Answers on envelope, correct me if I'm wrong there. I'm not going to look it up now. But yeah, great, it's amazing DJ, big man in the scene. But yeah, this is Shadowboxing, a track which I remember hearing in like underground raves all around London a lot when it first came out back in, well, I don't actually know, but like late 90s definitely. Of course, Shadowboxing, it's got the samples, some of the versions, there's a few versions of it, and the samples of about, what's it called? Shadowboxing. I think it's where drum and bass can pay homage to like the woo and hip hop. There's a lot of sort of Shaolin talk in some versions of, in some samples in some drum and bass tunes. There's the Kung Fu in this. Obviously it's tribute to Kung Fu, not specifically the Wu-Tang. It's sort of a bit of both at the same time. I just think of that because there's a track by The Source that I love at the moment called 100 that has Ghostface Killer just chatting in it. Great track as well. And I'll let this run now. Shadowboxing by Nasty Habits. So I just had to do a little impression there. Here we go. Yes, shadow boxing, nasty habits, moody, dark, moody synth. Loving that. Yeah, definitive track. Good word, definitive. And yeah, that's one of those tracks that definitely fits the vibe and the definition. So up next we have a track called Ice Age by DJ Ink. Ink being a great, famous, big, drum and bass DJ from Renegade Hardware. And this is his track, Ice Age, which has, to me, this just great intro. It's such snappy little hats there. And it comes in with this just naughty break. I don't know what it is. It's like, second to the Amen break, it's possibly one of my favourite little beats ever in drum and bass. Here you go, yeah, I can hear it. Just so well produced. And there's a lot of deep, warm sub in this one too. But I love it. I'll let it roll. Here we go. Yes, Ink there, smashing it around the dance floor with Ice Age. Yeah, so Doc Scott did Nasty Habits, of course, that first track, the second track I played there. And Dom and Roland had a little alias, not massively well known, but really cool, called Signal to Noise. This is one coming in now. I actually had on vinyls. It's got a little special place in my heart. Nanobugs. What can I say about this one? I think my favourite thing about it is it's got like a sort of acid techno, acid line vibe in it. The sort of noise at the beginning, after this bit, and then simultaneously at the end, there's a bit of a flatliney type thing, which is always weirdly fun in dance tunes. I'll let it play now. Nanobugs, Signal to Noise. That was Signal to Noise, Nanobugs. Now, moving swiftly on to possibly one of my favourite drum and bass tunes of all time, especially of the olden TECHSTEP variety, we have The 9 by Bad Company. Starting now. Is my impression of the best noise that you will hear. I was just chatting about this chat with someone at a rave ages and ages ago. They told me that they heard that it was the sampled sound of kamikaze pilots, which makes it a little bit more moody, but sort of, it's just noiseness, isn't it? It doesn't have to represent what it is. It just has to be that it's in a good sound that you can warp. And if that's what it is, it worked. So, what can you do to complain? This is The 9 by Bad Company, possibly one of the biggest of this sort of vibe that I'm talking about. Here we go. Boom, boom, boom. Yes, that is a track. Absolute banger. Coming up next, we have the Ed Rush and Optical Pac-Man coming in now with the Ram Trilogy remix. This track not only has a sample of Pac-Man dying, which is like, you know, one of the best, another great sample. It's also got one of the most rudest bass lines ever in my top 5 bass lines of all time. This just reminded me, there's a track I haven't put into this one from that, one of my other favourite bass lines of all time, but what can you do? You can't play every single track all the time, can you? So this is the Ram Trilogy remix of Ed Rush and Optical's Pac-Man. Ed Rush and Optical, another classic stalwarts, bosses again of this type of music, this particular TECHSTEP and the old late 90s drum and bass. Here we go with the Pac-Man song. Here we go. Yeah, so from Ed Rush and Optical to Future Cut, track called 2020. This one's got a rude bass, all these tracks kind of do, if we're honest. A little special place in my heart for this one. I remember attempting and succeeding most of the time to DJ this stuff and mix it back in the days. I had it on vinyl, or my friend Dylan Nocturnal had it on vinyl. Shout outs to him. I think I had it on vinyl myself actually. Shout outs to Dills if you're out there listening. He might be listening to this one. Loves this sort of drum and bass as well. This is Future Cut 2020 running. Future Cut 2020 vision used to make that track, I'm guessing. Maybe that's the name comes from. Yeah, I don't know what 2020 means. Something to do with testing your eyes. But I guess it means kind of on point in this sort of sense of the word. Okay, I am chatting shit at this point, so I'll shut up now. And next up we have a creeper. This is Future Forces Inc. with Saga. Definitive creeper. Long tune, takes its time to get going, but draws you right in there. And just feels dirty, which is a great thing. I'll just let it play, and you can hear it for yourself in a bit. Yeah. Ed Russian Optical coming after that track. That was Saga, a Future Forces thing. We've now got Sick Note by Ed Russian Optical. Definitely has another special place in my heart due to me having it on vinyl, and it was pretty much one of my favourite vinyls ever. We got Sick Note on one side, we had Watermelon on the other. Thinking about the watermelon aspect of it, I did hear, and I don't know if it's true, of course, Virus Recordings, that they once dropped a TV off a roof and recorded it in order to sample the sound, which is a great bit of myth or truth, whichever one it is. It's still great, because that would be a banging sound, literally. Anyway, so we go, Sick Note, Ed Russian Optical, awesome tune. Then we've got two more, and I'll be signing out. Yeah, here we go. Anyway, let's let it run. That was great, wasn't it? Love that. You gotta love that. So I have said this, and I will say this about a lot of people, especially because this is my favourite era of drum and bass. But one of the seminal top ass producers of the whole of this is Dillinger. We haven't had a track from him yet. So of course I chose Hard Noise, Dutty as fuck. Nat will, my mate, if you're listening, shout outs. Of course you're listening, you master these podcasts. Will appreciate this, especially seeing as he probably heard it out of the original Valve sound system, which he tells me about a lot, because it was designed, the tracks were designed for the sound system. I don't think I've actually experienced that system, sadly. Sad. Maybe if it's still about, I'll have to try and find it. Anyway, here we go. Hard Noise, Dillinger, penultimate track, Dirty as Fuck. Running. Yes. Such a track. It's got all the elements there. Literally, you couldn't make a better tune in some ways. I mean, obviously there are good, equally good tunes, but I don't think you can make a better one. If you could, send it my way. I need to hear it. So finally, we have a track called Tears. It's the Fantasia version. It's by Dead Man's Chest. Slow one, this. It's only 156 BPMs. Not usual in this sort of arena. It's very slow, but it works. I believe this, I'm not 100% sure. I'm pretty sure this isn't Turn of the Millennium. I think it's quite a bit later, but it has the old school vibes. So I thought I'd just whack it on the end, and it's also lovely. The singing's beautiful, the bass is epic, the piano noises, all of it. Little sample at the end, I won't spoil. I'll let it run now, and I will see you on another podcast. This was Step to the Tech, episode 14. Hope you enjoyed it. Stick around, check out other podcasts I've done. I do them all different topics and genres, really. Like music history, music appreciation podcasts. So check out the rest if you're interested. And yeah, you'll hear me again at some point if you do. All right, peace out. Enjoy the track.
Everybody in the place, nice! Ah yes, Fantasia. Ah yes, Fantasia. That's what it's all about. That's what it's all about. We provide the music, the lights, the sound, the DJs, the MCs.